Okay, Stacy, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it wasn't a single inspiration to write this particular book, but I had been accumulating poems for probably 10 years, and there were hundreds of them, on a computer disk. And my husband said, we've got to do something with this work, and I would send out individual poems, and so it became a matter of kind of focusing it somehow. And at one point, we just laid all the poems out on the floor and tried to see what was going on. And clearly, a lot of it deals, already with the West, the landscape of the West, the people of the West. So that kind of general focus was there. But what we began to see is kind of an ebb and flow. There were poems that were about really kind of the resurrection, the moments of birth and rebirth in the West. Moments, that suggested the kind of boom of the West that we're very familiar with. And then a lot of poems about the bankruptcy, human, geologic, economic. And so the book kind of then took on the form of that boom and bust, and the overlap that we see in kind of human experience and the landscape itself, and how it kind of gradually transforms, even nature itself in those cycles.
Now, I think people that live in the West are more aware of the edge that they live on, because nature can play bad tricks on you. Economies in places you've never heard of can play bad tricks on you, and you just kind of have to hang in there until the next time around.
Well, I think so, and if anyone has has lived in the West for very long, they're pretty comfortable with the idea of the bust is going to come, and real estate brokers will talk about it, and they're very aware of it, and they're just waiting. It's going to have to wait it out. And I think if you think about the drought, for example, in the West, naturally, we understand we can have 7 years of drought, or that we may be looking for 2 more, and so we're very comfortable, I think, in nature with that and understand that, economically with that. We may not be happy about it, but we've learned to kind of live with that up and down.
But it's still very hard on the individuals. I know that there was one poem in particular when you're talking about your brother and his dealings with the bank and what ends up happening to him.
Both my brother, my father, and probably half the people we knew went bankrupt in different, and I think there's a lot of ways to go bankrupt, that's kind of literally bankrupt, but I think people get depressed, and there's a lot of that in there, people kind of struggling, and that's emblematic of farmers, ranchers, oilmen, and the people who live in the West, and the kind of businesses, where you're really dependent on resources, and how quickly you can lose that.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that also, I think there's a very strong sense of family in here, and as you said, how they deal with boom and bust, but also I got the feeling of really how they affected you growing up. There are a couple of poems that deal with your parents, or I'm assuming that it was your parents, and the way they were that shaped the way you are.
I think so, and trying to think of how to, I always get too worried about being too, Freudian about how shaped we are by our experiences, but the bottom line is, you see things that you do, you think about the way you think about things, and you realize that your family has affected you dramatically. And in some ways, I feel I have this big debt to my father and my mother and my brother for stealing their stories, and they've been good about not getting mad for the way I've distorted them as well. So, I've been understanding that poetry is going to take something that's a real event or historical event, and then transform it. And so I took a lot from even my mother and father's families as farmers in Kansas, for example, and how those stories relate as well, and the hardships they had, and the moments of resurrection they had as well.
Well, there's a wonderful poem in here. We talked before we started rolling the tape about you reading a poem, and I think Horses is one that I found particularly poignant.
Okay.
If you would like to read that.
I'd love to read it. And this really did begin, there's a road outside, they're close to my home, where people were raising llamas. And so I would see these llamas every day driving by there, and it was kind of reassuring to see them. And then we see a lot of horses as well. So it kind of, although it's titled Horses, the interesting thing about it is it begins talking about llamas. So that's why, but I'll read Horses. 2 llamas rest on the drifting hill. Medium brown, tails curled like bottle brush, one with the face of a clown, and one bedded in the dirt, an anthill with a chimney. They dream of being horses, like the 2 eating at the fence where the rectangles of wire leave a grid on their stomachs and back-bent legs, or like the 4 who run from the cottonwoods where the white-gray jerks his nose in derision and a dark mare washes her knees in the creek. Farther down the road, a palomino runs yellow and sharp in the wind like a tinctured unicorn, and 5 brown horses mill around a clump of turning aspen to become an inverted sunflower, a sway-backed cinquefoil, a muddied pinwheel. My father, too, had horse aspirations, dreams of wearing pants without oil stains, of straight knuckles and soap-smelling hands, dreams that his teeth would fit and his wife would sleep against him. On better days, he simply yearned for the lawnmower to start, or for the cabinet doors to close the first time, for a fatty roast with small carrots and potatoes at dinner, or for the squirrels whose tails quivered into treble clefs and front paws grasped at wire straws, to leave the dog just once the hell alone.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I was reading along a number of your poems. You kind of suck us in, and we run along, and then wham.
That's the Frost called that expectation and surprise. That you create an expectation and hope your reader is following along with that expectation, and then surprise them. And writing poetry is a lot like that too. That a lot of the pleasure in it is kind of surprising yourself with where the poem takes a turn.
Mm-hmm. And that we have just a very brief time, but you don't just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to write a poem about llamas and horses, do you?
Sometimes, sometimes it's been in your head for a while, and the poem's almost formed sometimes by the time you sit down to do it. I keep, like most poets, a journal of ideas, of titles, of lines, and sometimes you never know where they're going to find a home, if you keep it. The more you write, the less revision in some ways you have to do, because by the time you sit down to type it, you've kind of formed the poem in your head. And so a lot of it then is really creating the rhythm, hearing that and perfecting that, small changes that create a kind of the integrity of the poem. But it's a lot of note-taking, a lot of observation. I think people always laugh at the kind of things I'm always observing. Well, did you see the hawk? Did you see this? And they think I'm kind of in my own little world, but I'm just observing closely and thinking that might be in a poem at some point. So.
Well, I think it's obvious from this book that you have observed very closely, and
I hope so. Thank you.
And been able to, I think, bring it out so the rest of us can enjoy it.
Well, thank you. I hope it's accessible and it's something people, remember that. Oh, I've seen that, or I've felt like that. So I'm hoping it resonates for people the way it resonates for me.
Oh, I think so. I want to thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.